Good morning. It is great to be here with you this morning, and it was a beautiful drive up actually this morning. When I left Grand Bay Westfield, it was just snowing a little bit of rain mix, and so the roads were nice and clear. Until I was getting closer to the church, and I was like, okay, I'm coming into a little more of the interior of the province, I guess, as the snow was picking up. But yeah, it was a great drive, and I'm so glad to have my son Kendrick with me as well this morning. And it's always nice to have some company on the road trips as well too. So as Brent mentioned, I serve with the CBAC as the Director of Youth and Family Ministries. And that means I get to resource and email Cheryl and other leaders quite regularly and support them. And I'm so thankful for the network of youth and children and camp directors that we have across Atlantic Canada. So many people who are committed to investing in and pouring into our next generation. And so it's a real pleasure to be able to work with them and support them. I also have the privilege of lecturing at Acadia Divinity College and lecturing in the Next Generation program there as well. And so it's a real pleasure to be able to get to connect with young leaders, newer leaders as they're coming through the Southern area as well too. And just to be able to see some of the partnership that we get to take part in as a CBAC. We're not just a network of churches, but we have a mission organization with Canadian Baptist Ministries and our schools, Crandall as well as Acadia. And so it's just really neat to be able to be a part of what God's doing in our region. And I want to say thank you on behalf of our staff for a couple of things. First of all, I want to say thank you for your prayers over the last number of months and weeks. In particular, as Brent mentioned, we have had a season of transition, but the plans for transition were a little bit affected when our interim executive minister, Terry, ended up in hospital and was quite serious, in quite serious health for a while. But we're so thankful for your prayers, and we're just so pleased to be able to report that he's at home, he's recovering, and looking to come back to work in a couple of weeks as well. So again, thank you for your prayers. But thank you as well for loaning us Brent to serve in this season as president of our CBAC in this time. Brent has been such an encouragement and a support to us as staff, especially in this year of transition. And numerous times Brent has sent me notes or encouraging emails, and it's just meant a lot to me. And so thank you for loaning us your pastor for this year as well. So I just want to say, it's just thank you for your role in being part of the CBAC, your ministry in your community of Rusagonis, to be able to live out the calling that Jesus has placed on you as a church and the ways that you are showing God's love to your neighborhood. I love Easter egg hunts, and I just think that's such a fun way to be an encouragement to your neighbors, and those kind of events are great. And so thank you for what you're doing to invest in and to love your neighbor. So I want to just spend a couple of minutes before we get into God's Word, just highlighting a little bit about CBAC and just bringing you some updates in terms of what we're doing. And I know I recognize some people may not even know what we are. What is the Canadian Baptist of Atlantic Canada? Many people still refer to us as the convention or the CBAC office. Why does this matter to us? So I just want to just explain that we get you, we are here for you. And we recognize that our communication and trying to make those connections with our churches it's not always easy. As Brent mentioned, we have over 400 churches, and so it's hard to always stay well connected to everyone and get our message out there. But really, we are a ministry partnership. We are a network of churches who have said we believe that we are stronger together by partnering in ministry together. And for a lot of years, our relationship was called the Convention, and this partnership has created our CBAC office. Our physical offices are currently located on the campus of Crandall University in Moncton. But a number of our staff, myself included, we work remotely, and it gives us the opportunity to connect with churches in a wide variety of locations around Atlantic Canada. But we are here for you, and we are from you. All of our staff are members of CBAC churches, and so we are committed to serving in and investing in our local congregations. And so when I'm at home in my home church of Grand Bay Baptist, I'm actually usually in the sound booth as much as I can be, and that's been my new favorite place to hang out during a service, but just finding ways that we can support our local churches. Our mission is to be a local Atlantic presence that connects and helps equip you as a local church to be doing the work that God has called you to do. And so what we do is we serve our broader Atlantic Canadian family in a number of ways. We're working on behalf of our 400 plus churches to address big needs for churches and neighborhoods around Atlantic Canada. Some of the things that we have done includes raising over $35,000 to support those who were affected by Hurricane Fiona back in the fall. We've supported the sponsorship of over 1,500 refugees since 2015. We're excited that we've got a number of new candidates coming before the ordination council this summer. And a big part of my role is planning some of the regional events that we get to do, especially within our youth networks. And so we're looking forward to making plans for One Conference, which is an overnight youth event in Moncton this summer, in June, as well as Tidal Impact in July. And I'm excited to see these events coming back and becoming part of our rhythm of youth ministry again in our region. I came into my role in the fall of 2019, which was not necessarily the best time to start a new ministry position. I found out about 3 months later when the pandemic started. And so these events that I came into my role anticipating, we haven't been able to have them in my entire time in this role. And so I'm really looking forward to getting them up and running again and having our churches like yours taking part in these events. We also give support to local congregations and leaders. Some of the things that we do, we hold pensions and benefits for your church staff. We have a number of new congregations that are taking root in communities across Atlantic Canada. We plan retreats for our leaders. We help with pastoral transitions. We do things like pre-authorized giving and help churches reimagine vision and mission for a new day. And so in a lot of ways, we provide a lot of administrative support to our churches and our staff. We are all committed to supporting our local churches. And so our staff is there to provide support, tools, and guidance for our churches in a number of different ways. And so really what we're calling our churches to be in this time of, as Brent mentioned, this time of transition, we're inviting our churches to continue to be all into our ministry, to be all into this partnership that we share, this resourcing that we do together. And so by contributing to the CBAC, you're helping us resource and support churches across Atlantic Canada. We're so thankful for your partnership. You are one of our top giving churches in our network, and so we're so thankful for your partnership and so thankful for the ways that you have continued to be all in into our ministry. And so we just want to just say thank you, express our gratitude, and remind ourselves that we share a common hope. We believe that Jesus is doing amazing things in Atlantic Canada, and we're so thankful to be able to be part of that work and to remind ourselves that we share this common hope, that Jesus is not finished with our region, that Jesus is doing new things, and it's through the work of this partnership of churches working together that we're able to do that. So this time we're going to move into our message, and the message this morning is called Who Said It Best? And we're going to be looking at a passage of scripture from Mark chapter 10, in particular the healing of blind Bartimaeus. But I'm actually going to go back a little bit before that and look at the story before of Jesus and his encounter with his disciples just before that. But if you've got your Bibles with you, I invite you to turn to Mark chapter 10, and we're going to read from there in a few minutes. To kind of get us thinking of the context of the story, I want you to remember the story of Aladdin and his lamp. If you're familiar with the story of Aladdin and his lamp, in this story that we're going to be looking at with Bartimaeus and with the disciples, Jesus asks them a question: what do you want me to do for you? And when I first hear that question, it kind of makes me think a little bit of Aladdin and the lamp. If you remember the story of Aladdin, he's this poor boy who, through a series of circumstances, if you've seen either of the Disney movies, those are kind of what I'm referring to, and through a series of circumstances, he finds himself the holder of this magical lamp. And you know the story where the genie comes out of the lamp and comes to Aladdin and says, you've got 3 wishes. You can do whatever you want. And Aladdin, being this poor boy, uses the wishes to alleviate himself out of poverty and also to get the attention of the girl that the princess that he's falling in love with. So he's attracted to power and influence, and Aladdin uses his wishes to get himself out of the circumstances that he finds himself in. But in the end, he uses his final wish to set the genie free. And in our Bible passage this morning that we'll be looking at, Bartimaeus is faced with a similar question. Basically, when Jesus asks, what do you want me to do for you? And if sometimes we can almost approach God and think of God as this kind of cosmic, mystical genie. And sometimes as we come to prayer, we just want God to come to us and say, what do you want me to do for you? And we probably have all kinds of answers that we would love to present to God if God actually came to us and asked us that question. But in our passages this morning, Jesus asked the same question to two groups of people. So I'm actually going to go back a little bit and starting to read at verse 35 in Mark chapter 10. So James and John are two of the sons of Zebedee. They approached Jesus and they said, "Teacher, we want you to do whatever we ask you." "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked them. Now listen to what they said. They answered him, "Allow us to sit at your right and at your left in your glory." And Jesus said to them, "You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with?" "We are able," they told him. Jesus said to them, "You will drink the cup I drink, and you will be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not mine to give. Instead, it is for those for whom it has been prepared." When the 10 disciples heard this, they began to be indignant with James and John. Jesus called them over and said to them, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those in high positions act as tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. On the contrary, whoever wants to become great among you will become your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you will be a slave to all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." Jesus didn't like their answer. When he asked them, "What do you want me to do for you?" It's pretty clear in the passage that Jesus wasn't a fan of how James and John answered him. What's happening in the passage is that Jesus and his disciples are moving towards Jerusalem. And in these last chapters, before we get into Palm Sunday and the events of the Holy Week, Jesus and his disciples are moving from community to community, and there's different encounters along the way. And so as they're heading towards Jerusalem, Mark continues to go on and tells us that they came to Jericho in verse 46. "And as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a large crowd, Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the road. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out, 'Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me.' Many warned him to keep quiet, but he was crying out all the more, 'Have mercy on me, Son of David.'" When the passage there says many warned him to keep quiet, they might also say they rebuked him. Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called the blind man and said to him, "Have courage, get up, he's calling for you." He threw off his coat, jumped up, and came to Jesus. Then Jesus answered him, same question again, "What do you want me to do for you?" "Rabboni," the blind man said to him, "I want to see." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has saved you." Immediately he could see and began to follow Jesus on the road. I think Jesus likes his answer a lot better in this part of the passage. So some of the context for this passage, this is the last healing before Jesus goes on to Jerusalem. It concludes a section on discipleship that Jesus is revealing to his disciples. In the few chapters up to this point, Jesus has really been unpacking for his disciples what it means to be a disciple. If you're going to go back to Mark chapter 8, verse 31, you can see that from there until the end of this story with Bartimaeus, it's really about discipleship, helping us as readers understand what does it mean to follow Jesus, and helping the disciples understand what does it actually mean to be a disciple. And so throughout this section of Mark's gospel, there's theme after theme about what it means to be a disciple. And it's like, as I mentioned, it's also the last healing miracle that Mark records. But Bartimaeus is set up to contrast with the 12 disciples. Prior to the story with Bartimaeus, Jesus gave this prediction of his death. And James and John had asked Jesus, like, we want something from you. And, in response to Jesus' question, "What do you want me to do for you?" James and John asked for more power. They wanted authority, they wanted glory, they recognized in some way that Jesus was this king, he was the one promised from God, and so they thought, here's my chance to also become, maybe not the king, but to sit at the right and the left hand. They were looking for power, they were looking for authority. And Jesus chastises them. Like Aladdin, they were kind of tempted by the appeal of power, and they wanted to see Jesus like this genie who could grant them their wishes for authority and power. I think Jesus is a shortcut to that kind of influence. And Jesus sets them up to be contrasted with Bartimaeus, or Mark sets them up to be contrasted with Bartimaeus. We see that Bartimaeus is this blind beggar. He's forced to depend on the charity of others. He's often seen as a fixture on the streets, often someone that people just walk by, they don't necessarily notice. People were looking down on him. They weren't seeing him as someone made in the image of God. In their day, in their context, it was common for people to look at someone like Bartimaeus and think, he must have really sinned, or his parents must have really sinned in order for him to be cursed like that. And so they judged him without knowing him. But Bartimaeus must have known something about who Jesus was. We see him calling out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And that's the first time in Mark's Gospel that the phrase Son of David is actually used. It's this kingly title. It's used to refer to someone who is the promised one from God. It was used to recognize that Jesus is a king. David, of course, was this great king from the history of Israel. And so when Bartimaeus is calling him the Son of David, he's saying to the crowd around him, Jesus is the king that we've been waiting for. And when Jesus hears this, he stops. The Greek word that's used here indicates that Jesus actually stands still. This phrase gets his attention. Jesus is looking around and he sees who's calling him the Son of David. And so he invites Bartimaeus to come to him. And again, he asks him the question, what do you want me to do for you? So the message title is, who said it best? Was it Bartimaeus, who was looking simply to see, or was it the disciples who were looking for power and authority and glory? It's pretty clear that it was Bartimaeus who had the better answer. Which makes me wonder, what is my answer like? If Jesus was to show up and ask me that question, what would my answer be like? Is my answer more like the 12 disciples, looking for power and influence? Or am I more like Bartimaeus, looking for clarity, looking to see, looking to understand what's happening in the fuller picture of what's going on? Like James and John, there are a number of times that I fall into this trap of wanting more power and authority and influence, kind of looking nostalgically back to a time when the church was the center of our community life. As someone who's an ordained pastor, it's easy to look back nostalgically and think, I would love it if people noticed me more, if people had more influence, or paid more attention to my influence. I've got 4 kids, and my oldest daughter and I have been reading Anne of Green Gables for the last number of years. And we're working our way through the series, and we're on the second to last book now, reading that together. But one of the things that I'm noticing as Ella Montgomery writes about life in rural PEI at the turn of the last century is the influence that the church has in that culture in that day. And the church was often the center of the community life. And Ella Montgomery often wrote very critically about church life and community life and small town community life. And yet there's something about the center of the community and the influence of the minister in that community that I have to admit is a little bit appealing to me. And I have to think, if Jesus showed up to me today and said, what do you want me to do for you? Would I be drawn to that kind of attention and influence again? Would my answer be more like James and John? Or would it be more like Bartimaeus? You know, there's a part of me that I just simply want to know what's going to happen next. I want more understanding. The last few years in particular have been so disruptive as we've encountered world-changing event after world-changing events. As I look at the just what my own kids have experienced in the last few years of their school education. A couple of friends and I have joked and said it's almost like the entire 20th century has been rolled up into the last 4 or 5 years with global pandemics and the threat of global conflict and the threat of nuclear war. Like a lot of these major events that took place in the 20th century have almost been kind of like pressed into the last 4 or 5 years again. And there's a part of me that, like Bartimaeus, I just want clarity. I just want to know what's happening. I want to be able to see Jesus more clearly. In the last couple of weeks, I've had the chance to kind of talk about this story with a couple of young audiences, both at a young adult retreat that I was speaking at, as well as a middle school Christian fellowship group that I started leading at my kids' middle school. And I would ask them this question: if Jesus appeared before you and said, "What do you want me to do for you?" And I asked the students these questions, and these are some of their answers. They asked for rest from school and activities. They asked for release from anxiety and pressure. They asked for rescue from unfriendly peer dynamics. And they also asked for being in the presence of Jesus. And I thought their answers sound a whole lot more like Bartimaeus's than they do like James and John. No one asked to have authority over the world. They asked for deliverance from what's affecting them, removing obstacles so that they can be closer to Jesus. As Brent mentioned, I live in the community of Grand Bay Westfield, which is outside of St. John. One of the perks of living outside of St. John, I mean, there's many. St. John's a great city, but it's nicer living outside the city than it is in the city, I think. But one of the perks is this weird microclimate experience that we have called the fog belts. And if you're familiar with driving into St. John, there's probably been different times in the city when you've driven into the city and you've gone through this like wall of fog, which just kind of like circles around the entire city. Most of the time in Grand Bay Westfield, we live on the other side of the fog belt, meaning that in the summer, it can be beautiful and hot and warm, like humid, and be like 35 degrees at home. And we just have to drive 10 to 15 minutes. It can cool down like 20 degrees. When we first moved to Grand Bay Westfield, it was a real shock. I remember one afternoon gardening with my daughter, and we run out of some supplies, and we said, okay, we'll just drive into Kent and pick up some things. And so we jumped in the van, and it was like 25, 30 degrees, and we were just in shorts and t-shirts. We get into St. John, and it's cold, and it's like misty, and like we're like shivering, and we're like run into the store so we can get what we need. But this fog belt is this really unique experience that I think is relevant to the lack of clarity that we sometimes face in our world. The fog, of course, is caused by when the warm air meets the cold waters of the Bay of Fundy, and this fog experience is created. And likewise, as we're looking to understand what's happening in our world and what Jesus is up to, there are some forces that are at play in our world that create almost like this fog-like experience. And there's numerous ones, but I just want to highlight quickly 3 and suggest some practices in response to these. Because I think that as Christians, it's easy sometimes to kind of live in our heads, but we're shaped by how we live out our lives and how habits form us and shape us. And so if we actually want to respond to things that are happening in our world, I think it's important to pay attention to the habits and the rhythms that shape our lives. So the first part that creates this fog is this rise in anxiety and loneliness that we see happening. And we recognize that, especially for our young people, we're seeing increasing rates of anxiety and loneliness taking place in our youngest generations. Depression, suicide ideation, all of these things are rising in astronomical numbers. And I want to remind us, I want to challenge us that our young people don't need always our correction and our judgment, but they need our love and support and our compassion. Increasingly, our culture is telling our young people to be self-sufficient, to make decisions on their own, and we as a culture often authorize them to make decisions about their own identity without the collective wisdom and the support of people around them. We tell them at the age of 10, 11, 12, 15, that you know who you are and you can define who you are without the input of people who love and care for them. And I think that's a part of what's leading to these rapid rise of anxiety and depression that we're seeing in our young people. And so in response to that, I think one of the easiest things that we can do as a church is to respond by building trusted relationships with others, especially young people. In my role, especially with Acadia and the research that I do in preparing for courses, one of the things that I've most been struck by is, as I look at research, one study in particular looked at students who were experiencing high rates of anxiety and loneliness, and it compared it with students who were not experiencing the same high rates. And it asked the question, what's the difference? And it wasn't about students who just simply came to church. Sometimes we think if we can just get more students to come to church, that'll solve their problems. That wasn't the answer. But what made the difference was the number of meaningful, trusted relationships a young person had with adults. And the more trusted relationships that a young person has with adults, the greater the decline in rates of anxiety, depression, and loneliness. And I just think as a church, that's a huge opportunity for us to respond to needs in our community, to needs in our young people. And so we can make the habit of building relationships with our young people. I'm sure Cheryl would love it if all of you signed up to be youth leaders for youth group. But But the thing is, we don't all have to do that either. But I mean, you should. But we can also work on building relationships and getting to know the young people. We don't have to be a youth leader to be in relationship with young people. And so get to know the young people around you, whether it's in your church, in your neighborhood, at the grocery store. But begin by building relationships and becoming a trusted influence in their lives. Sounds intimidating, but it's much easier once we actually try it. But we can make a difference in the lives of some of our young people. Another factor that's creating this fog that we live in as we try to figure out what does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus is the increase in screen time and cell phone and social media use that we experience and the social disintegration that often brings. And as a parent of teenagers, often as I'm in the checkout at Costco or Sobeys or wherever, I often hear people make disparaging comments about how much screen time young people I display and the number of hours that they spend on their phones and on their devices. And I like to respond by saying, yes, it's true, and it's almost as much as adults spend on their devices. The reality is that as adults, we tend to be worse at how much time we spend on screens than young people. And so I think, but we have to realize that the amount of time that we spend on our screens does affect how we're in relationship with each other. It does affect the ways that we view the world. There are forces and algorithms that are at play in terms of the content that we watch, and those shape us. And we saw those at play during the pandemic, as we saw incredible divisions take place in communities all over our continent. And a lot of that had to do with how social media was feeding different narratives. And so my challenge for us to be thinking about how much think about how much time we spend on our screens. And the simple habit to respond is by limiting the amount of time that we spend on our screens. Limiting the amount of time that we spend on social media. Like, let's be in relationship together. Let's spend face-to-face time together. And so I think it's important to pay attention to that. Things like taking up hobbies, building relationships, those are all important. The last part of the fog forces that I want to highlight this morning is this increasing individualism that we see in our society and the increasing trend towards encouraging us to have it our way, to be so self-focused and so self-absorbed that we're so concerned about making sure that everything is according to the way that we want. And it's as simple as the advertisements that we see from, making sure that we have our personal preference with our hamburgers, to making sure that the new cars that we buy have all the accommodations that we want. But we're constantly talking about having things our way and also discovering ourselves and trying to figure out who our most authentic selves are. And as parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, we follow through on these trends of individualism by making sure that our children have the freedom to make all the choices that they want. There's a study that I've been a part of, our denomination has been a part of. One of the neat things about our denomination is the opportunity to partner with other groups across the nation. And so over the last 3 years, we've been part of a research study with the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada that's been looking at parenting faith. And the report's just in the process of being released, and if you follow us at CBC, you'll be hearing more about this in the weeks to come. But one of the things that we found fascinating as our researchers were coming back with this report is that one of the challenges we saw in terms of passing the faith on to the next generation, of parents making sure that their kids were following Jesus, was this tendency towards giving our kids as much choice as possible. And so as parents, we often don't want to tell our kids what to believe because we want to let them have the full freedom to make the choice that they want to. And at some levels that sounds good, and it is good. But the ripple effects of those kind of processes is that we're seeing more and more of our young people increasingly walk away from their faith, walk away from church. And by giving our kids too much freedom, too much choice, we're actually not discipling them to follow Jesus. And I think that's an important trend for us to be aware of. So all of these are social forces that are at play and are causing us to not see Jesus as clearly. It's important to be aware of them. And so as we think about the world that we live in, as we think about the question that Jesus asked Bartimaeus and the disciples, what do you want me to do for you? I want to challenge us to be prayerfully asking for clarity, prayerfully asking for Jesus to make things more clear to us, so that these social forces of screen time and individualism, they're not necessarily bad in and of themselves, but too much can be a bad thing. So we need to be praying for clarity, so that we can be better at following Jesus and helping make sense of what's happening in our world. I want to wrap up by just reading from Psalm 119, a few verses. When the psalmist writes, "Your word is a lamp for my feet and a light on my path." That reminder for us that Jesus, as the Word of God, the Scriptures, bring clarity to us. They help us understand and point us back towards Christ. The psalmist continues and says, "I have solemnly sworn to keep your righteous judgments. I am severely afflicted. Lord, give me life according to your word. Lord, please accept my free will offerings of praise and teach me your judgments. My life is constantly in danger, yet I do not forget your instruction. The wicked have set a trap for me, but I have not wandered from your precepts. I have your decrees as a heritage forever. Indeed, they are the joy of my heart. I am resolved to obey your statutes to the very end." So I hope that our prayer is to be like Bartimaeus, to see clearly, and to use the Word of God as a lamp to our feet and a light to our path to help us see. I'd love to pray for you as a church as we finish our time here. Father God, I thank you so much for this community of believers here at Rusagonis Baptist, and I thank you for their commitment to their community, their love for their neighborhoods, God, the ways that they are committed to joining you in the neighborhood. So I pray blessing on them. I pray, God, that they would be encouraged in the ways that they're looking to show love and affection to one another and to their neighborhoods. I pray that they would see clearly, that you would reveal things about their worlds to them, so they would know how to love and follow you. Thank you for their pastor. Thank you for Brent. Thank you for Cheryl and others in leadership here at the church. And pray a blessing on them as they continue to lead and to point your people forward to you. In your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen.